Hey, how's it going? I am so pumped to be here tonight. One, I wish I was in sunny Southwest Florida with all of y'all. It snowed. I live in New York and it snowed yesterday. So seeing y'all in tank tops and wearing warmer clothes is quite nice. But I'm so glad to be here. I actually learned how to code through a community program that taught me Python a little while back. It was called Hear Me Code in Washington, D.C., and it was free beginner-friendly classes for women by women. And one of the first meetups I ever went to was a PyLadies event. So I am so pumped to be with you all tonight. And tonight we're going to be talking about how to explore a user's tweets, but really this code that we're going to be talking about tonight is actually how I write most of my demos. It's kind of the foundational like boilerplate code I use for most things that I do. It's actually my first time giving this talk, so any feedback that you have, please give it to me. I'm so excited to share this with you. And it's actually funny, when Vanessa first reached out to me about this, she actually reached out about another talk. And I was like, maybe I'll take a step back and try this new talk. That kind of goes into like how I build it and how I can like extend on that. So tonight we're going to be talking about the steps that you would need to build something that explores a user's tweets. Typically, a lot of times we see Twitter bots being built as like people's first entryway into the Twitter API, but I always like working with like tweets coming back. I don't know, I like the data science side of things. And so so tonight I'll be talking with you about how to explore a user's tweets. My name is Jessica. I'm a developer advocate at Twitter. So you might be wondering, like, what does that mean? What does a developer advocate do? Like, how do you advocate for developers? And so what that means is I hang out with developers, such as everyone who's here tonight, speak at conferences, speak at meetups, have one-on-one conversations. If you're looking to build with the Twitter API and you don't know where to start, sometimes I'll like talk to you. I talk to groups of people. On the flip side, if you're having issues getting access to the Twitter API, I can help you out. If when a lot of times internally people are like, so how will developers receive this new feature? I'm in the meetings trying to advocate for the needs of the developer community. So that's what I do at Twitter. It's super cool. I feel like I have one of the best jobs that one can actually have because I get to build really cool things with Python all day. So that's super fun. And you can find me on Twitter at Jessica Garson. Yeah. So the agenda for tonight is that we're going to talk about what you need to get started building with the Twitter API, steps to building a solution, talk a little bit about like what you can build with the Twitter API as well. And we'll do some conclusion and next steps. Also, feel free to use the question box. I have it shared on a different screen. So if you want to introduce yourself in the question box or anything like that, I may ask you questions. I'll be watching that as well. So cool. Also, a note on today. So this is a tutorial, but I'll also be a live coded adventure as well. If you see me make a syntax error or anything, please say something in the question box. I'll probably make at least one, probably more, to be honest. But please let me know. It's one of my favorite things about being in a room full of developers is that we're all here to help each other out. So there may be a syntax error too. Also, this is a tutorial, so I'll be taking breaks and pausing, but if you get lost, that's okay. This is recorded. You can reach out to me after. Also, with that being said too, you need a Twitter developer account and you need to apply for access. If you don't have access to the Twitter API, that's okay. This will be recorded and I'm happy to like, if your application's still pending or anything like that, just let me know. So this is gonna be a little bit of an adventure, but it should be fun. I'm excited. I've rehearsed it a couple of times, so it should be good. And actually, we're gonna be talking about two endpoints tonight. One is recent search, which allows you to retrieve and explore the public timeline of a user's tweets from the past 7 days. So it basically lets you get tweets from the past week. And this is the only endpoint available to do what I wanted to do until today at 4 p.m. And we actually just announced another endpoint, Timelines. Our new V2 version of Timelines just launched this afternoon. And so there's two Timelines endpoints, one for user tweets and one for user mentions. So with these new endpoints, you can request a Twitter users' tweets for their last 3,200 tweets, or mentions up to 800 that reference their user ID. So we'll be doing some work on that today. I'm pretty excited, and also very stoked to be giving this talk tonight right after it was launched, and I tested the new endpoints and everything's still working. So really excited to share that with you tonight. Cool. Do I have any questions from the audience before we get too deep into things? Cool. So now let's actually start talking about what you would need to get started. So the first thing to work with the Twitter API is that you would need an approved developer account, and you can apply for access at twitter.com/apply for access. I'm actually going to drop the link into chat right now. So that's the first thing. If you do have a developer account, you're more than welcome to follow along. If not, that's okay. And then also, you'll need to have activated the new developer portal experience. And what that looks like is something like this. You'd see this project, it's new and blue. If you have the old one, it's purple. So it's pretty easy to know if you have the new one or the old one as well. And actually, I'll drop that into chat as well too. So it's going to be, somebody asked actually a really good question. James asked, is everyone generally accepted for access? It depends. We do have so we have an automation policy, and we do have rules of engagement. Pretty much if you're just doing general, like making a Twitter bot or like, doing most general things, you will get accepted. And if you reach any snafus or anything happens or anything comes up, just let me know. So it can get tricky, but it is something that we are trying to improve that process as well actively too. But pretty much, if you're like, hey, I saw a tutorial given by a developer advocate on Twitter, and I want to do something similar to, or I want to build XYZ, you'll probably get accepted. Hope that answers your question. And so inside of the new developer portal, you're going to need to have a project and an app connected to a project. And you can only have one for the time being, project with one app connected to it. And actually, my colleague Suham wrote this really awesome step-by-step guide to making your first request to the new Twitter API. So I'm going to drop that in here as well. And then from today, so if you don't have, if you've never set up the Twitter API yet and haven't created a project and an app, I'll pause for a minute to just answer any questions and do that as well before we get too deep into this. And also feel free to ask me any questions during the paused breaks as well. We'll be doing a few of them. Cool, I guess we'll wait a few minutes. And then once you have your project and app set up, from there, you're going to want to grab your bearer token. So the easiest way to do that is to go here and then actually, this is probably showing, the keys and tokens from there are where you're going to want to grab your keys and tokens, and you'd actually want to grab the one that's entitled bearer token. And if you need to regenerate it, you can actually just regenerate it and get a new bearer token as well. And these are something that you want to keep very secure. Treat them as your house keys. You don't want to check them into GitHub. You want to be very careful with them. And we'll actually be using an environment variable to be working with our bearer token tonight. So it's a little bit about what you need to get started. And then once you have everything you need and all the prerequisites, from there, what you can do is you can set an objective for your work. And this is kind of like when I'm working with the Twitter API or like building something new, I often like will use a notebook and be like, okay, so what can I do? What are the possibilities? So a couple of different things. There are a couple of different things where like you can like try to like think about like what you might want to build. So while exploring the tweets of a user, you may want to create a workflow trigger. So if a user tweets X, from there, Y can happen, such as if you have, such as, you know, let's say you're following Twitter dev on Twitter, and if they tweet the words important change, you can get a email sent to your work email to let you know. Or one example that I built about a couple of years ago now, I have a car in New York City, and the city of New York has a alternate side of the street parking restrictions, which means that which means that most days of the week I had to move my car. However, I was moving my car like way too much. So I built, and there were a lot of like holidays and emergency situations, and I just wouldn't know about them until like far after. So I created an app that would text me every time I didn't have to move my car. And that was if the word suspended and tomorrow appeared in the same tweet, then I would get a text message telling me that I didn't have to move my car and to enjoy my night. I also recently built, about maybe 5 months ago, I built a self-care bot of sorts. I used recent search to perform tweet sentiment on my own tweets. So it let me know, it gave me a score of how positive my week was, which was like a good check-in, being like, okay, cool, like maybe I should do some more yoga, or maybe I should like, you know, relax a little bit more and watch more movies and like take a step back. So that was really fun too as well. So those are some ideas to throw out. So I'm going to give everybody like maybe a minute or two to think of an idea you want to build with the Twitter API. And if you want to drop into chat, that would be cool too. Cool. Well, after that, the next step would be to connect to the Twitter API. And this is the step that I like to think about like passing in the secret handshake. Like I think of the Twitter API as like a really cool club, like one that you really want to go to. And like the way that you get into it is by passing in the secret handshake. And for the time being, it's going to be your bearer token. That is what we're going to be using for authentication. And so we'll be using the request package of Python today, just to help us out with that, but we'll be making some authentication headers. So let's get started with the live code portion of today's tutorial. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to spin up a Jupyter notebook. And to do that, you just want to type Jupyter notebook inside of your terminal and press enter. I already have one running, so I'm just going to do Control C on that. And then from here, the next thing is we're going to want to import in all of the packages that we're going to be wanting to use today. So we're going to import pandas as PD, and we'll be using pandas to create a data frame. And then from here, we're going to want to also import requests and import OS as well. And we'll be using requests to connect to the Twitter API to make a request. And then we'll also be using OS to pass in our authentication headers. And I'll give everybody, and Joe, I do hope that you find a small business idea as well. I'll give everyone a second. Cool. So from here, now we can start to create a function called connect to Twitter. And from here, we're going to want to create a variable for our bearer token. And we're going to want to set that to be our environment variable. But before we can do that, we're going to want to set an environment variable. So I'm going to go into my terminal here. I'm going to make this actually a little bit bigger too. And then from here, the way that I would do this is I would create an environment variable inside of my terminal. And this makes sure that I don't accidentally put my credentials inside of my code. I want to be very careful with that. So to do that, what I would do is I would create inside of my terminal, and you might need to make a new terminal window. From here, what we can do is we can export bearer token, and then we want this to equal your bearer token. And then I'm going to do Control C on that. But and Anessa, you mentioned that 232 page throws an error. Cool. I don't think that that's related to, I think that's actually a Spring cohort. So I don't think that's related to this. I thought that was like some new fancy, like online IDE or something that I didn't know about. So cool, awesome. All right.
239 is the area code for Southwest Florida.
Oh, cool, awesome. Now I feel like I've learned something new. Cool, let's go back to the Jupyter notebook. And so from here, now we could do OS, which stands for operating system. It's part of the standard library Python. And we could do OS environ.get, and we can get the bearer token. And then from here, we're going to want to put a return statement on this. We can do return. And then from here, this is going to want to be a dictionary. So inside of a dictionary, you have a key and you have a value. And so the key is going to be authorization, and the value is going to be bearer. And we're going to do some string format. So we have this curly brackets, and then we're going to do dot format, and we're going to pass in the bearer token, which we just got. And this is the authentication headers that we're going to pass into our request. And then we also need the end of the dictionary as well. So let's make sure we have everything that we need in here. Cool. And now we can, in the next, create a variable called headers, and then connect to Twitter as the headers. Oh, cool. So we have an error. And I think I spelled environ wrong. So that's fun. I think it is ENVIRON. That should be good. And let's try that. Cool. Yay, first syntax error of the day. I'll stop and give everyone a chance to catch up. Cool. And let me know if you have any questions too at this point. And Mike, I love Jupyter Notebooks. It's my favorite way of working with anything that you get a response for. I just love being able to see my data and manipulate it that way. Yeah, it's really great. I don't know. I just really like being able to kind of like have that kind of spreadsheet-like type data in front of me. Yeah, I do like having like the documentation too, and being able to like one thing that Mike is talking about right now is that I can actually add a new cell here. And I can actually, if I go into cell, I can actually change the cell type, and I can do it as a markdown and say, hello, or explain what's happening in the code more, or really anything like that. So actually, that's a good idea. Maybe we can have step 3 is going to be after this, so I can add that in here, and maybe even move this cell up a little bit, and then do step 1. And we go to the cell and change the cell type to markdown, and we could do that. Cool. All right. Or actually, I think that was step 2. Step 1 was coming up with your objective. Cool. All right. And it is great for building knowledge KVs and handing out for team transfer as well. And yeah, Joe, you mentioned some really good feedback that's actually really important to note is that while filling out the developer access, it seems that you want a very well thought out reason for building an app. I just want to explore the API. That's okay. You can actually just say something like, hey, I saw like a developer advocate speak, I'm really excited to try this out. I think they just want to make sure that you're like a real human that's doing stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think it should be okay. And if it's not, just let me know. My DMs are open and here to help out. Cool. Let's actually go back into the slides. So step 3 is actually one of my favorite steps. And I like to take kind of like an iterative approach to this. With V2 of the Twitter API, we've come to a paradigm of instead of just giving you all the fields that you'd ever want to use from the Twitter API JSON object, you now have to ask for the fields that you want. And that's really fun, but it's often helpful to kind of like take a step back and figure out like which tweets you do want and which tweets you don't want, and then make sure that like, you have, and like what type of data you want and what type of data you don't want. And you want to make sure that you have like all of the fields that you would want to use. So like you want to make sure that you have your query to include like the appropriate logic that you want to exclude, and make sure that you have like all the fields that you're going to want to get back. One time recently, I was working with the Twitter API and I forgot that we have a field called lang. And I did all of this like machine learning to try to get the language of a tweet. And I was like, oh yeah, we have a field for that called language. Like I didn't have to do that. I tend to use Postman for this. I love working with Postman. I don't know, has anybody here ever worked with Postman before? They're great. Yeah, I'm speaking actually at their conference coming up. They're awesome. I really like working with them. There's this tool and you could kind of just like start playing around with your requests and adding different parameters. And we have a Postman collection as well too, which is really awesome. And I like to kind of like take an iterative approach. Like a lot of times I'll like send a request, or maybe I'll add like to context annotations, let's add lang to that list too. These are just fields I use often. And this is pretty awesome because then you can actually start to kind of like see how your data changes. And we have some expansions too that basically do like a join of a table. So we have like the polls object and the media object, and we have other different sorts of expansions as well. So let's actually maybe play with that too. Maybe let's do, I think maybe media keys is a good one. Yeah, let's do that. And yeah, we have a Postman collection that you can download. That's what I'm using now. Cool. So now you can kind of see the payload start to change a little bit. You can kind of see our entities, and our context annotations are basically like machine learning. They give you like a category of what your tweet's about, which is pretty awesome. So like this one is a brand and a company because it's Twitter dev. Yeah. And so you can actually maybe even get rid of those expansions and maybe get rid of like context annotations here. I just like to like use this as a way to start playing around. Also, sometimes if I'm in a hurry or like I'm having issues with my code, I'll actually use the code button to kind of just start to generate that stuff too. And I realized that I actually showed something I shouldn't have shown with that. So cool, I'll be revoking my Bearer token later. Yay for live demos, but yeah, that is good times always. But yeah, the code snippets are really, really helpful as well sometimes. So yeah, cool. So yeah, let's actually go back and maybe and let's actually make our request. Cool. So from here, let's actually add a new sound and let's make a request. We're going to make a function called make request headers. And then from here, let's actually pass in the URL that we're going to want to work with. I always mess this up in front of live humans. So I am going to cut and paste this. And that is not the right thing. Cool, so we have this URL and it's gonna be hitting https api.twitter.com/to/tweet/search/recent. And then by default, we'll just get back just the tweet ID and the tweet text. So from here, we're gonna wanna do params, and then we're gonna do query equals from Twitter dev. And there's an E here. Cool, we're gonna fix that. And so from here, we're just gonna say that we want tweets from the past 7 days from Twitter dev. And then from here, oh, and I forgot to put the return statement in here. So let's do that. And let's return request dot request. We're gonna make a get request. And we're going to want to pass in the URL that we have and the params that we have. And then from here, we also, and let's do params equal params. And then from here, and that's all of like the queries and the extra stuff is the way I like to think about, like your tweet fields, your query, all of that, that's in the params. And then the headers is our authentication headers we made in the last step. So headers equals headers. And now from here, we can actually make a request. So I'm just going to cut and paste for time. So let's do response equals make request headers. And then from here, let's actually print out the response. And that worked out. That's awesome. So now let's actually add a .json. I always like to know that I did it right before I do this. So now we can put it into a JSON payload. And now we get back a JSON payload of tweets from the past 7 days, which is super awesome. So that's super cool. Yeah, these are tweets from Twitter dev. That's our team's, it's my team's Twitter handle, and they're tweets from the past 7 days. Cool. So I can actually just kind of show my code here. I don't know how to do word wrap inside of a Jupyter notebook. If anybody knows, please let me know in the chat. I can also pass in, I can actually also add this function into the chat as well. Just to give folks a moment to catch up. Awesome, cool. Well, um, I guess let's actually, if folks feel okay, let's go to the next slide. So the next step is to add or create any additional like connections or logic that you need for working with the Twitter API. For tonight, the idea that I had was that we were going to put the tweets into a data frame and send that data frame to a CSV. I use DataFrame so much. It's sort of the basis of like all of my code samples. There's something about that like tabular structure that makes it really easy to like work with, or you could send it to a CSV and do other stuff with it. Like there's just so much you can do. And so it's really easy to like, it's a nice way to parse your JSON and to like work with it in a really robust way. And I don't know, I like working with it. So that's sort of the next step that I had. And it's pretty great because like, it's really awesome to kind of like start to kind of like build in this step and like working with the Twitter API or really any API, start to think about like, okay, cool. Like, is there any other like built-in logic, timing, or API connections that you need to perform the tasks that you identified in your objective? And so, for example, if you were like creating like a workflow trigger that when Twitter dev tweets the words important change, you'd also need to think about like, do I need to connect to an API or a library to send an email to my work account? Do I need to connect to like a service to like send a text message if I'm building that app? Or will I need to use something like TensorFlow, or like I used a machine learning API from Azure to do some of my sentiment analysis? Like start to think about like what else you would need. Like, and then also like how often it needs to run. So like, do you need to set up like a cron job or AWS Lambda or something like that as well too? So yeah, just kind of thinking through like, all right, so what do I need? Like, what are all the different connections that I'll need to, you know, make my code example work? Um, so for tonight, since it's just a very simple example that I'm going to be walking through, we're going to want to make it into a data frame and then send that data frame to a CSV. So from here, let's actually make a function and let's call it make data frame. And so from here, we want to return this as pd.dataframe, and then we actually want this to be the response data. So one thing that you might notice is inside of this tweet object, there are two objects. So there's one called data that has the tweets and the IDs, and then there's this other one called meta, which is a really good name for it. It has the newest ID, the oldest ID, and how many results. And since by default, it will only return the last 10 tweets unless you specify like the max results, there was only 8 tweets from the last week, it's going to work out pretty well. Somebody said, hey, hi, what's up? How's it going? Do you have a question? Hi, thanks for stopping in the chat. If you do have a question, feel free to ask. I am paying attention to the chat box, so feel free to ask. And then from here, let's actually call this function. So we're going to call this df, and we're going to do make df response. And then from here, let's actually view the data frame just by doing df. And now we can start to see our tweets from Twitter dev for the past 7 days in a data frame. And then we could do df.toCSV, and then we can name our file. And we can name it tweets.csv. And we could put the full path if we want to send it to someplace that's not a relative path of where we are. I'm in a folder called PyLadies, Southwest Florida somewhere. So yeah, now if I go back in here, you can actually see that I have tweets.csv in here, which was just updated seconds ago. So I made a CSV. Actually, we could take a look at that too. And it looks like a CSV. I could probably open it as a CSV, which is pretty awesome. And yeah, I can send the code into the chat. Oh, actually, I think I missed a line of the code. It's going to be this first. It's going to be the df make data frame response first. So let me just kind of paste that. And then the df to CSV tweets dot CSV. Cool. Yeah, cool. So that's a little bit about how you would start to do this. I did mention that there was a new endpoint available. So I guess we can actually switch over and call that. So from here, I'm actually going to switch up the URL into this new timelines one, which will give us the last 3,200 tweets. This is the brand new one that was just launched today from a user. And this is Twitter Dev's user ID, which I actually got from adding in the user ID into my payload. And then from here, I can actually change the params here. So let's actually, since we were working in Postman, let's actually grab the parameters that we were playing with earlier. Yeah, that should be pretty good. So I'm just gonna, and I'm actually gonna have this be the max results as 100. So it should be 100 tweets. So it should be a little bit more hefty. So the max results are 100 and the tweet fields equals lang for language. That's the one I forgot that one time. Conversation ID, which lets you just learn more about a given conversation and like see who replied to it, and you could do some other really cool stuff with it. And then the created up. And that's like the timestamp for the tweet. And so from here, let's just rerun some of the code. And then now we have a much bigger data frame in here. And then we could just we can override our tweets.csv and send that to a CSV. Or call it, if we wanted to, timelines, tweets, CSV as well. So that's pretty exciting. Those are two ways that you can accomplish it. And you might be wondering, like, what's the difference? One is just more data, and that might be useful. Also, it's more than just a week. But there might be some occasions where you do want just tweets from a week. Also, with recent search, you could do more than just look for tweets from the past 7 days, or you could only get tweets from the past 7 days, but you could do more than just get from a specific user. You could do to a specific user. I was on a Twitch stream last week where I had people tweet at me while I was making music using the Python library of Foxdot to make music. And I put all of their tweets into a data frame and then access different parts of it while I was like making music on top of that. And I use the to operator to do that. And then there's also like an emoji operator or like a keyword operator if I wanted to look for, tweets about synths or things like that too. And we have an integrate guide in our documentation for recent search as well that goes through all the different operators that you can use for recent search. Yeah, so let's go back to the slides. I'd love to hear from y'all what other ideas you have, like what else you want to build with the Twitter API, what else you want to build in general. It doesn't necessarily have to be API related or even Twitter related or anything like that. I just want to hear from y'all what you want to build. So if you have ideas, feel free to drop them into chat. And let me know if this inspires you to create anything. You could tweet at me at Jessica Garson. My DMs are open. If you have any questions, you just want to chat about like career advice or anything. It was really an honor to be with everybody tonight. I really miss like gathering in person at meetups such as this one. So thank you. And if you run into any trouble or have any questions along the way, you could let us know at Twitter Dev or on the Twitter community forums. I'm often answering questions there too. Thank you so much and really appreciated being invited to speak here tonight.